All right, we're recording. Happy Wednesday. I need a haircut. Hit record from home, making art every day, doing it with other people, collaboration, hope to inspire you to do the same. Today I wrote. I usually write in the dark. Yes, I write in the dark. Do you like to write? Went looking for writing projects, found a tiny story project. I think I've talked about tiny stories before. Tiny stories is a lovely old thing that we've been doing on Hit Record for years now. We've published 3 books, really 4 actually. We self-published the first one and then published 3 books with HarperCollins of the Tiny Book of Tiny Stories. It was originally started by Wiro. They're very simple, kind of try to tell a complete story in as few words as possible, really, and couple it with an illustration, and usually between a sparse set of words and that illustration, you can, if you try, you can really tell something complete, really something that has hopefully a beginning, middle, and end, or at least like a progression, a story, a real story. So today I found a tiny story project that was started by, hold on, I'm standing at the window, but I don't remember all the details. It was a tiny story project started by Aladi. She found a great illustration by Feng Bi. This is a recent illustration, just went up a week ago, of someone looking out the window. Relatable in this moment when many of us are spending a lot of time at home. Quick nod to the folks who are not staying at home for whatever reason that might be, because you're doing essential work or because you have to keep doing your job for whatever reason you have. It's a luxury to be staying at home. We're making a documentary project about who gets to stay home and who doesn't get to stay home and how this pandemic is not impacting everybody equally. It's called Who Stays Home. Come contribute to that project. Check it out. Lots of great contributions coming into it. Sorry for the tangent, but it's pertinent as this illustration shows this character looking out their window. It's a great choice from Aladi to start a project based on this illustration. And write a tiny story about it. Tiny stories sometimes end up tiny films. But so I did a bit of writing. And the challenge, of course, is to try to tell a complete story in as few words as possible, inspired by this illustration, and not just inspired by what I always really try to go for when I'm writing really anything, but especially a tiny story. And a tiny story is a really good way to exercise this muscle, is how do you not be redundant? How do you tell a complete story where the text is providing something that the illustration is not providing, and the illustration is providing something that the text is not providing. If you eliminate redundancy, you can cover more ground and tell a more complete and more robust, layered, nuanced, interesting story that gives the reader more to chew on with fewer words. Whereas if you're redundant, then you're wasting words. You're like, oh, you don't need to say that. For example, I wrote a version of this tiny story, and then it was a little longer, and then I figured out how to cut it down. Or actually, before I tell you how I cut it down, let me just read you what I wrote. The view outside always brought her peace, but she never saw me. At first, I think I wrote, every day she looked out her window, and it always brought her a sense of peace and harmony, but she never saw me. It was 3 sentences, and then I changed it to, the view outside her window always brought her peace and harmony, but she never saw me. So that's 2 sentences. And then I thought, maybe I don't need to say, brought her a sense of peace and harmony. You could just say, brought her peace. Okay, the view outside her window always brought her peace, but she never saw me. But actually, we don't need to say it's the view outside her window, because you can see in the illustration that she's looking out her window. So you could just say, the view outside always brought her peace, but she never saw me. That's where I stopped. That second sentence, but she never saw me, this is kind of what I'm talking about. You can add something with the text that's not in the visual. There's a whole other character in this story. There's someone watching her. Does that person mean her harm? Is that person in love with her? There's a story now. You're not looking over the shoulder of an admirer or a killer or anything like that. That me is not in the visual. So that's the kind of thing that I try to bring to a tiny story. It's what can the text bring that's not in the visual? And I also always try to think about what is the visual providing that the text doesn't need to cover, because it's already there to be seen. And by the way, I think I made this point before, but by the way, this is exactly the same thing you do when you're making a movie, is you figure out what is the camera, what part of the story is the camera telling, what can the audience see? The audience doesn't need to hear spoken about. And then what are the things that the dialogue can bring that the audience didn't see? All right, I'll leave it there for today. I'd love to see you guys write a tiny story based on this same illustration, or there are tons of tiny story projects, and you can do this same thing. Try to exercise that muscle, like eliminate redundancy. What can the text bring that the visual is not bringing? And what can the visual, what can be left to the visual that the text doesn't need to cover? That's it. Happy writing. See you tomorrow. Thanks again.